How to build better habits. We all shower daily. Well, at least I hope we do. Growing up, at some point, most likely our parents stressed to us that it was really important for us to shower daily. And we bought into it. We implemented this into our daily life, something we can put on autopilot. Humans collectively have, for the most part, embraced the act of bathing at some point in the day, at least once, perhaps twice a day. It does not matter how bad our day was, or if we are sick or tired, whether it's a weekday or weekend, or we're on vacation. Somehow, we almost always follow through with this particular habit. It does not take that much thought or effort. And once we have made our way to the bathroom, showering is for the most part an autopilot action. Now, think for a minute, if that is how we viewed exercising, what if we jumped out of bed to work out, even if we didn't feel like it? Why are some habits so effortless, while others are so difficult to maintain? There is also, of course, the other side of the coin. Habits that are easy to keep up with, but are bad habits that we do not want to have. Most of us probably do not think about our habits all that often. I mean, isn't that the selling point anyways? To not have to think about them? But a big portion of our daily routines are actually automated. So imagine the power of a better grasp of the habit forming process can have on our goals and just the overall well-being of life. But first, have you ever stopped to think why we even have habits in the first place? It is obvious that they are useful to us. Life would be much more difficult if we had to think through every step of driving or brushing our teeth each time. But our ancestors did not do many of the tasks we do now. So what is the importance of habits in the first place? Habits release a neurochemical response. A habit is a very standardized sequence of actions, and it is optimized for our mental resources. Studies in mice have indicated that once habituated to the process of finding food from a certain place, the mice brain spends very little energy compared to mice that actually have to hunt for it in the wild. Similarly, our human minds are not equipped with all the resources in the world. Repetitive steps must be standardized in order for us to have reserves for when we need them. In other words, we have limited bandwidth, and repetition requires less energy. This is why we gravitate towards routines and habitual actions. Now that we know a little science behind why habits exist, let us try and understand the inner workings a little bit more. It is crucial to start by paying attention to one of the key factors of habit creation, and that is context. In fact, as far as human behavior is concerned, habits are defined not only as repetitive, but being repetitive in response to stimulation or cues. More technically speaking, habits are simply responses that are triggered subconsciously in response to contextual stimulation that have been associated with their performance. This context is key, as I just mentioned, with the act of showering. Showering co-occurs with the act of either beginning or ending your day, depending on your routine. And since humans sleep every day, the trigger for bathing is also ever present, what makes it such a good habit. Other habits, such as eating healthy, require just as much contextual support. However, if that decision is made for superficial reasons, such as looking good for the summer, instead of seeking a higher quality of life, then the habit will be noticeably harder to maintain. Unlike showering, where the cue was constant, eating healthier to look better in the summer will only have temporary contextual co-occurrence. Once summer is over, the motivation to keep a good body vanishes, and with it, the habit. Another interesting look about contextual cues is they are not as dependent on time as one might think. This means the habit of showering is not so dependent on time of day per se, as it is on the act of waking up or going to bed. Sure, environment and time do play a role, but the point is that doing the same thing at the same time each day is not necessarily what creates the longest lasting habits. This is great news, of course, as it means that we don't have to religiously set our alarm clock to stick to our habits. Instead, we need a consistent string of actions to help us create positive habits. There is more to this. This string of actions is so powerful in helping us create habits that simply visualizing the set of actions can make it more likely for us to follow through with them. Neuroscientist and professor of neurology Andrew Huberman talks about this in his podcast, Referring to Learning. He uses the illustration of someone trying to make a habit of making espresso in the morning. Andrew says simply visualizing the steps of making the espresso makes you more likely to actually get up and make that espresso. The procedural stepping through of the steps of the recipe sets in motion the neurons that are going to be required. It's as though the dominoes fall more easily, all of which makes neurons which are likely to fire more likely to fire. But perhaps one of the most recognizable works on habits in general lately has been James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. In it, he writes, "Your habits are modern-day solutions to ancient desires, new versions of old vices. The underlying motives behind human behavior remain the same." Here, James is referring to the tremendous power habits have to influence our actions and long-term life trajectory. This is due to the fact that they originate from such deeply ingrained traits. He uses the compound interest illustration to paint a picture for our minds. Just 1% improvement over a year, which may seem immaterial in the grand scheme of things, can snowball to exponential growth over a sustained period of time. A 1% decline, on the other hand, will landslide us into nothing over the same period. The author is stressing the importance for smaller, more steady changes to our lives, which will ultimately enhance it in the long run. Instead of completely changing our lives overnight and holding on unto unrealistic goals that will burn anyone out in no time, the author suggests that we pursue smaller, more manageable changes consistently. This should not be shocking. Humans are creatures of habit. We have never liked change. But if the change is small enough, we do not mind, and we will accept it. Facts that are drastically opposed to the beliefs we hold are quickly dismissed. This holds true as well for actions that are simply too different from what we are used to. These just do not get incorporated into our daily life too well. Small adjustments allow us to sustain some semblance of motivation over the transition. Expecting to suddenly have a successful YouTube channel when you haven't even made a YouTube video is not only impossible, but it will also leave you feeling discouraged and will zap away the satisfaction of the process, leading to burnout. Instead, it is much better to have small, clear, and manageable goals, such as, today I will focus on successfully recording my voiceover and editing my first video. Now, if good habits are so crucial, this should really expose some light on the bad habits that we have. We've all got them. You know, the social media addiction, the junk food craving, the Netflix binging, the gossiping. These habits are created and instilled into our life much faster than the good habits. And unfortunately, they end up staying around for much longer, or even worse, permanently, unless we change our course. This is again due to the triggers and cues and how easily they occur for bad habits. For example, let's say you end up eating junk food when you're bored. The cue here is boredom, and that is not something you have to put in effort to reproduce. It's just there. Unlike jogging, for example, when you need to discipline yourself and come up with a routine, boredom is always going to be there, whether you like it or not. And when it is there, so is your craving for junk food. Over time, your body internalizes this process so that once the craving arises, things like going to the pantry and opening up a bag of chips takes no conscious effort whatsoever. The neurochemical efficiency of habits and the ease with which some of them can be learned means that bad habits are really, really hard to remove from our lives. We first make our habits, then our habits make us. So it is critical to make sure we are forming good ones. Many people have tried hacks to help them with positive habit formation and to eliminate bad habits. For example, setting a reminder on their phones to work out seems like an intuitive thing to do. And at this point, social media addiction has become mainstream. And just being glued to your phone for that matter, some people download apps that monitor how often we use or access the phone, and it will give a report of screen time. But most of us are weak-minded, and we end up disabling the app, and soon enough, we are back to our old ways. I, for one, am guilty of ignoring screen time reports, or deleting the monitoring app altogether. I have done this with my evening jogs as well. I will set my shoes out by the door and tell myself that I will go jog as soon as I finish work. But when the time comes, I walk right past the shoes and ignore them. This is the power of habits used correctly. A habit can easily adapt and continue to be a positive factor for our life until it is subconscious. Used incorrectly, however, they are ruthless, pulling us down and zapping any motivation to improve our lives. Studies have indicated that alarms and reminders do not seem to show any noticeable long-term impact on habit execution after an initial short-term spike. Punishing yourself, however, does show some impact. For example, cash penalties, like an alarm clock that will shred a $100 bill that is across the room and you can't stop it unless you're out of bed. Punishing ourselves, though, is typically not the healthiest strategy for most people to form good habits. A lot like screen timers on cell phones, these penalties too can be overridden in the correct environment. Andrew Huberman suggests that the key eliminating bad habits is not to punish ourselves so much, but rather pair each execution of the bad habits with a good one. So, to add on the Netflix binging example, this might mean that every time you spend hours on the couch, you want to pair it up with an easy to execute good habit, such as forcing yourself to read 30 pages before bed. This may sound a bit odd because it makes it seem like you're essentially rewarding yourself to do the bad thing more often, since there is an incentive at the end of it. However, Andrew says that in reality, what actually happens is that you consciously rewire your brain to respond to the contextual cues differently. So now, when you get really bored, your response is twofold. First, to snack, and then go jog. Pairing the good habit with the bad one supposedly establishes enough of a level playing field that the wiring for the bad habit is no longer as dominant as it used to be. Besides, as a bonus, you end up with a good habit. The key to managing our habits is down to a question we all need to ask ourselves. What is the reason for the habits we are trying to form? Do we want to actually improve the quality of our lives? Or are we artificially doing it to impress others or for some other extrinsic reason? Forming good habits becomes a lot easier when you have intrinsic reasons for doing them and you can remind yourself of them throughout the process. And most importantly, remember that slow and steady change is more effective than drastic, radical change. Aim to become 1% better as you strive to become a better you. And do not beat yourself up if you fail. Tomorrow is a fresh day to try again.